discussing the nesting of HTML elements within other elements, and also the difference between block versus inline elements. I'm just going to clean up some of the code that we created in the previous video. I'll get rid of these h1 tags, just leaving our initial one. I'll delete our style tags as we've hooked up our external CSS, and I'll save this. We have already nested some HTML elements within others. For example, the h1 tags that we created were nested within the body tags. The meta, title, and links are nested in the head. And within the HTML tags, all of our additional tags are nested within it. We'll add a new type of tag. This will be a div, which stands for division. The div tag is used extremely often within HTML code. The div tag is an empty container that is used to define a division or a section. It does not affect the content or layout, and it is used to group HTML elements to be styled with CSS or manipulated with scripts. Within our first div tag, we can nest a second div tag. I'll save this, go back to our browser, and as you can see, we've got no evidence that divs exist within our display. But if we go to body, which we've nested our divs in, we can see that we've got our first div and our second div. Just to clarify, I'll add an ID to each of our divs. Save this, refresh, and now we can see we have div 2 nested within div 1. We'll go to our styles. I'll delete the ID of third heading, and I'll delete the h1 tag specification for what color it displays to just leave the class of heading 1. I'm going to delete the ID associated with our second div and also the first. The first div I'm going to specify a class for, which is going to be equal to container. We can set some CSS styling to our div with the class name container. So full stop to specify that it is a class, and then the name of the class, curly braces. I'm going to add some additional types of style. In the past we've used color and background color. Here we can add a border style, which takes in dash dotted double and a whole list that will be displayed if you're using Atom or other code editors. I'm going to type solid. I'll save this. We'll go back to our browser. We'll refresh and we can see that we've got something resembling a border, but we don't have height yet. So we'll add some heights now. I'll set this to 100 pixels. refresh, and now we've got our border surrounding our container div, which we can see here. We'll change the border width. The border color. And we'll save and we'll refresh. The border got slightly thicker and it is now red. From here, I want to place our original H1 tag and nest it within our second div here. So what I'm going to do is highlight this, press Ctrl C to copy and paste it. Also delete the original one and save this. Refresh, and now we have our H1 tag nested within both our secondary div and our container div. We'll get to styling this section in a moment, but first we'll look at the difference between inline and block elements. The div by default is a block element. I'll create a new div. I'll give this a class of div element. Include the ending tag. I'll copy and paste two more. And in styles.css, we'll access the div element class. I'll set a height and a width. And also a background color. I'll save this, make sure we save the index.html, go back to the browser and refresh. In our styles.css, we'll add a margin around each of our div elements. We'll get to margins and padding very soon, but for now, all that's done is added a margin around each of our div elements just to make things a bit more clear. As you can see, we've got our first div, our second, and our third. The first div will push the second div down, and the second div will push the third div down. This is because these are block elements rather than inline elements. I'm going to specify a new type of tag which is called span. I'll type 1 in our first span, two in our second, and 3 in our third. After a refresh, we see that we've got 1, 2, and 3 displaying. Now, as opposed to our div elements, which are displaying in block, our spans are displaying inline. Another example of block elements are P tags, which stand for paragraphs. And another example of inline elements are the EM tags. EM tags specify emphasis. Which by default I believe are italic. We'll save this, refresh, and now we have our paragraph tags displaying in block and our emphasis tags displaying inline. If we go to our styles.css file, we can specify that all paragraphs be displayed inline. We'll save this, refresh, and now we've got our paragraph tags displaying inline. And similarly to our emphasis tags, if we display these in block, we can refresh, and now we have them displayed in block. So block elements and inline elements, or the concept behind them, is handy to know when we get into laying out our content for our page. It's just something to build upon when you do run into issues with pages not displaying as you want them to be displayed. In the next tutorial, we'll be getting into laying out the content to our desired specifications, which includes adding padding and margin.